You'd be hard-pressed to find a horror movie with a stronger start than 1959's The House on Haunted Hill.
The ghosts are moving tonight, restless, hungry.
And it's precisely this strong start that makes its ending so disappointing. Spoiler warning, all of the supernatural events we see occurring in the house and throughout the movie are revealed to be fake. An elaborate scheme to kill a husband, a scheme ultimately turned back around on the one who perpetrated it. But why is this ending disappointing? Well, we were promised ghosts, and we thought they were delivered, but as it turns out, the advertisements were misleading. The House on Haunted Hill is a horror movie filled with empty promises. But why is it exactly that it's so disappointing? Well, it gives you all the answers. And as we all know,
imagine for a moment that you're in a dark church, but you can hear a piano playing. You don't exactly know why, but you know that something seems off about it until the answer comes flooding in. Suddenly, a piano in a quiet church is normal and not scary.
you see, something that absolutely does not belong in horror movies is answers. At least not the way they're done in The House on Haunted Hill. The House on Haunted Hill plays much more like a whodunit mystery movie. And in these whodunit mysteries, well, a big reveal at the end of all the weird things that have been going on throughout the whole thing is par for the course. But that's a big difference between mystery movies and horror movies. You see, mysteries reveal the answer to us at the end, and horror movies, well,
The other approach horror movies take to answers is not giving them. They show you a bunch of strange events and never give you the satisfaction of knowing why they are occurring or how they are occurring. They simply just are.
to illustrate this point, we've got to talk about Italian horror. Now, I love old Italian movies to begin with. The Good, the Bad, the Ugly, A Fistful of Dollars. That whole Dollars trilogy is an amazing film. Are amazing films. But that same style is applied to horror when you go in to look at the movie The Beyond. Now, the movie The Beyond is a movie about a girl who moves into a haunted house and simply just tries to turn it into a hotel. And all this horrible stuff starts happening. And it's never explained why the house is haunted. It's also never explained what's going on and like what the logic of the movie is. There's a lot of just nonsense that just happens, and stuff just be happening in this movie all over the place. There's people melting, there's people getting their eyes ripped out, there's people's flesh like molding together. There's like a 10-minute scene of spiders crawling towards a guy. Nothing in the movie makes sense. Essentially, the whole plot is that the house is built over a gate to hell. And that's about it. That's about the only explanation we get. And this movie is terrifying. And it's terrifying because there are no answers. Other forms of media that use this kind of no answers thing to add to the scares is the back rooms, for example. I think is one of the strongest. The back rooms is just, really explain how you get to the back rooms and why it works, and you can't, because the back rooms is a concept that has no answers. And when you start to try to put answers on it is when you start getting kind of silly and having to suspend disbelief. When there's no answer, the concept works very well. And it's a very strong horror story, or horror concept, the idea of the backrooms. This idea is prevalent in other Italian films other than The Beyond. The Beyond is part of a Gates of Hell trilogy, and each movie kind of has more answers than the last, but The Beyond is the one with the least amount of answers, and it happens to be the scariest one. There's another Italian horror movie called Suspiria, and that movie has maybe more answers than The Beyond, but a lot of it still doesn't make a whole lot of sense, and that's what makes it scary, is that there's never answers given as to why the creepy things are happening. Now, are these movies good? No. Not by good movie standards. The acting is phoned in. These movies were done in something called IDR, and so everyone of the actors wasn't necessarily an English person, an English-speaking person, and so they just spoke in their native language, and someone would go in and dub over their lines in the studio afterwards, and so you get kind of clunky dialogue and things like that. But that's prevalent in all Italian cinema, at least in the early days, 60s, 70s, and 80s. And it's prevalent in Suspiria and definitely in The Beyond. So, objectively, no, these are not good movies. But they're cult classics, and I love them. Because I actually do think they're good movies. I think there's something in them beyond the bad performances and the nonsense logic. And part of those performances, part of the whole, like, the lips not adding up and the nonsense logic adds to the horror of the overall film. The idea of horror without answers has been around for a long time. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein, for example. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein never explains to you how the monster is made. It simply says it is. So you have to imagine for yourself what kind of horrible things Frankenstein must do to create his monster. The book doesn't just give you those answers. Point being, horror without answers is effective horror. Now, some of you might be saying to yourself, but Soul Carney, I've seen plenty of movies that give plenty of answers, and they're still terrifying. To you I say, you're right. Because okay, now what I'm not about to do is contradict everything I just said. All I mean is this. There is a right way and a wrong way to do answers in horror movies. It's much easier to get scares when you don't give the answers, but when the answers are delivered properly, the horror is more effective. I think a genre of horror media that is particularly good at making answers scary is analog horror. Now, I'm thinking specifically certain things like the Walton Files. There's one whole video in the Walton Files series that goes through and gives you all the answers you need in the most horrifying context possible.
Sophie!
Now, since this isn't a video about the Walton Files, I'm not going to dig deep into it. I'm simply going to ask you to watch it for yourself and figure out what I mean. But it essentially boils down to this. The answers become scarier than the questions. Another brilliant example of this is something very similar to the Walton Files, and actually something that the Walton Files wouldn't exist without: Five Nights at Freddy's. Five Nights at Freddy's is so effective because the answers are scarier than the questions asked. Also, you don't need the answers to enjoy playing the games. The games are just jump scary and fun without needing any of the lore behind it. But if you start digging a little bit and it's like, okay, why are these animatronics like attacking me? You start to learn the lore and you're like, oh my god. And the answers given to all of your questions in that series are way worse than the questions you asked in the first place. So that's why something like Five Nights at Freddy's or the Walton Files are particularly terrifying. There are other great examples of analog horror that do this well, building on answers in the making more questions as they go, as well as every answer given being scarier than the questions raised. The Mandela Catalog is another great example of this. There are other forms of horror media that do this well. I am particularly a fan of Bram Stoker's Dracula. Now this is a book that asks a lot of questions and gives subtle answers. You slowly find out over the course of the book what is happening. And as it begins to dawn on you, everything that is connecting after chapter of just reading things that don't seem like they are of any consequence, the horror just sinks in every time because you know the answers that they don't in the book, the characters. So in the case of Dracula, answers are scary. But I think the best example of this is an episode of The Twilight Zone. Big surprise, I'm a major fan of The Twilight Zone. If you've seen any of my other videos, there's a good chance I talked about The Twilight Zone in them. But in Season 3, Episode 4, The Passerby, the answers given deliver the horror in a brilliant and unique way. So I'm sitting here and watching this episode, and I think I need to go through what it's about before I show you what I need to show you so you understand what's happening. So it's about a road that leads back from the Civil War. It's introduced as the afterword of the Civil War, and everyone's walking down it, Union, Confederate soldiers, and this Confederate soldier stops off at a house and begins to talk to a lady. And he starts to play his guitar, and then this scene happens.
You know that song of yours?
What is it? Life is the true love.
Judd, my husband, he used to sing that song.
Now these are all literally just throwaway lines and throwaway scenes. The greater mystery of the episode is what is going on with the road. Who's on it? Who's coming down it? Why are there Union and Confederate soldiers? Why is no one really talking? And there begins to be this suspicion that everyone on the road is maybe a ghost or dead. But, again, it's only a suspicion. They meet people that they thought were dead on the road. So up until now, it is just a suspicion that maybe people on the road are dead or something. There's just a mystery surrounding the road. But all of our questions get answered with this one scene.
I don't know, ma'am. But there's something down the end of that road, and I gotta find out what it is. So, I'll just take my leave, ma'am, and I wish you well. I most certainly wish you well.
Sergeant, I'd be alone. Please don't go. Stay here.
No, ma'am. There's nothing here that could ever belong to me, nothing at all.
What do you think you'll find at the end of that road? A future? Judd! Oh. Oh.
All of our questions are answered. All of our suspicions are confirmed the second you hear him start singing. And it sends chills down my spine. It gives me goosebumps every time I watch it. Seriously, just sitting there watching it for the 5th or 6th time to do it for this video, again, gave me goosebumps. It's terrifying. It's brilliant storytelling. It's how you make answers scary.
Let's recontextualize. Let's say I'm in a dark church at night, and it's old and it's abandoned, but I happen to know a story about the piano player here who had a heart attack while playing the keys one Sunday morning. And now, when I hear the piano playing, the answer comes rushing in like a punch in the chest. The horror is no longer in the question, but the answer. Huh? Ready?
Yep.
Ready? Alright. The other answer. Dang it. Alright. Let's recontextualize. Dadgummit, I missed the lever. You did it 3 and not 4, didn't you?
Stop chewing your gum.
You're right next to the camera.
Spit it out. Let's recontextualize. Man, I missed the lever again. That way. Okay. Let's recontextualize.